Welcome, everyone, to an interesting interview with Professor Will Schumacher, the new CEO and president of Mission Nation Publishing. We're very thankful that God has led Will to this opportunity and this ministry. Will is the mission professor of historical theology at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. Before that, he was a missionary in Botswana, South Africa, for 10 years. He has MDiv and PhD degrees from Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. Will, tell us a little bit about yourself, about you, about your family.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. Great to be connected with Mission Nation. When I was a seminary student, my wife and I prayed a lot about uh, where God wanted us to be. We prayed that He would put us where He wanted us to be. And gradually, through my time at the seminary, we became more open to international service. Both my wife and I had lived in other countries. Both We can talk about that another time, maybe. We had both worked on learning other languages. My wife was a Spanish minor, and I was a German major. So that possibility of international service was always on our minds, but we weren't really sure if that was what God wanted us to do. By the end of our seminary time, though, we did open ourselves to that. And my first call when I graduated from Concordia Seminary was as a missionary to Botswana in southern Africa. And that ministry, 10 years of ministry in Africa, uh, changed me forever, I think. It changed the way I think about pastoral ministry. It changed the way I think about theology.
What do
Uh,
you mean? What do you mean by that? How did it change you?
well, it changed me because, in a lot of ways, for one thing, I realized that I needed to slow it down and bring down the level of my intellectual discourse. By the time I graduated from seminary, I was a pretty highly educated North American. Um, and I did very well at seminary. I wasn't the highest GPA in my class, but I had a high GPA. But in Botswana, uh, I talked like a baby. And then after a year, I talked like a third grader. And then after several years, I talked like maybe a seventh or eighth grader. And it was very important. In fact, it was necessary for me to present the ideas in a biblical text when I was preaching at a very basic level, a simple, straightforward level. And that was a tremendously important education for me.
So
Um,
you learned humility, and you
well,
also
yeah,
learned.
that's for sure. That's for sure. And you can't learn to preach in another language without learning a lot of humility. I made lots of mistakes, looked silly a lot, and it was not about my dignity or expertise. It was about the gospel of Jesus Christ, connecting at a level where people could understand.
Well,
Uh,
besides the challenge of learning a new language, what other challenges did you have as a missionary specifically?
well, Botswana, the people in Botswana have had connections with and interaction with Western missionaries for a very long time. Some of the earliest European missionaries in Africa were in southern Africa among the Tswana people. So it's not as if they had never had any contact with the Christian message or with Western missionaries. And that turned out to be kind of a challenge for us because they had very specific expectations of what a foreign missionary was supposed to do for them. They were pretty sure I was supposed to build them a building, um, and be perhaps a source of employment for some of them. And I had I had been taught a different set of expectations for my missionary service, and we had to figure out how that was going to work.
Did you have education specifically how to be a missionary, and how is missionary different from being a pastor? Because you went through a
Well,
system that taught you how to be a pastor, basically.
that is true. That is true. I had both at the seminary and toward the end of my MDiv studies, and after seminary graduation, before we landed in Botswana, we had some specialized training in cross-cultural ministry. That is to say, uh, communicating the gospel and doing Christian ministry among people very different from ourselves. That goes way beyond language. It goes to the whole set of assumptions. It involves what people value and what they're loyal to, and a lot of the most important elements of cross-cultural ministry are things people usually don't talk about explicitly. Their deepest uh, fears, their deepest desires, what they believe to be true about the world.
Can you
Um,
give us an example of the difference between those beliefs in Botswana and the United States?
Sure. Even among Christian people in Botswana, the role of the spirits of their ancestors was tremendously important. Now, I understand North Americans who are very proud of their families and have done their genealogy and look back on great grandpa who served in the First World War or whatever it is. That's not the same thing. For the Tswana people, as for many African peoples, the their ancestors are really spiritually present with them and have an effect on their lives for better and for worse. And making sure that the ancestors are kept happy is an important part of the traditional religion among the Tswana. And that's an element of the traditional religion uh, that even Christians will often participate in. There might be even some small sacrifices offered for the ancestors. Um, I'm not sure if that's ancestor worship or not, uh, but if your God is what you fear, love, and trust, then the ancestors were were dealt with as gods by many of the Tswana people,
Now,
even people who were church members. And
when you were going through seminary, you were taught how to worship, how to lead worship. Uh, is that what you did? Did you do the same way when you were in Botswana? The same kind of worship that you were prepared to do to be a pastor in the United States?
well, I certainly could. We were on loan to a German mission, and their practice was uh, very liturgical worship, uh, like they did it in Germany, with vestments and all of the liturgical elements. Of course, translated from German into Tswana. They didn't try to teach the local people German. Um, but uh, one thing I discovered is that the local people, since they were accustomed to religious ceremonies that had to be done in a very precise way by the right kind of person in order to have their magical spiritual effect, um, they sort of thought the liturgy was magic.
Hmm.
Um, and when I realized that, I started emphasizing the liturgy much less, and I started not doing it in the same way all the time, just to make sure that they didn't think this was a magic ritual.
Hmm. Hmm. And you had an organ and violins and oh,
No, no, it didn't have an organ. Actually, most of the time there were no instruments at all. Um, the It was all a cappella singing. They have a particular style of singing which I tried to learn a little bit so I could lead it. It's a sort of call and response where the leader would provide the next line of the song in a kind of chant, and everybody would sing it back. And
okay.
yeah, so no, usually no instruments at all.
So you had to learn to relate as in the culture and be sensitive to the culture that was there. But also your vocation. You didn't go to be the pastor of that church. You went to be a missionary. How was that different?
Well, the pastor's job is not to be there forever until God calls him home or another congregation calls him. Uh, from the very beginning, from my first visit in a new town or village in Botswana, I was on the lookout for the people had in mind locally to be the spiritual leaders of that congregation, the ones that God would raise up to be workers for Him and to serve His people. Because honestly, uh, uh, I don't think a foreigner could really be qualified to be a pastor, to minister to the deepest needs of the hearts of those people. That was going to take a local Christian man whom God had raised up and given the gifts and the desire to serve His people there.
Was there a seminary that was there that they would go to and spend 3 years or 4 years, that kind of thing?
The church we worked with, the Lutheran Church in Southern Africa, operated a seminary in South Africa. At the time of my service in Botswana, that seminary was located pretty far away in the province of Natal, in a Zulu-speaking area. Now, historically, the Tswana people and the Zulu people, uh, let's just put it kindly and say they didn't always get along, and it was culturally and emotionally really difficult to send Tswana students from Botswana to a Zulu speaking area in South Africa. They didn't like going to South Africa because we were still there during the apartheid years. So a Black African student from Botswana didn't really want to go to South Africa. And they were not always comfortable among the Zulu. They were a little afraid of that. So, yeah, there was reluctance among promising young seminary age students to go to a foreign country, and while they were there, they were going to have to learn Zulu. So,
So what did you do?
well, we started a lay training program, not to replace the seminary, but to supplement it, and to raise up non-ordained lay leaders, church elders, local preachers, catechists, women's group leaders. That was a really important part of the ministry. Some of the strongest and most important leaders in local congregations as they got started were faithful women. So we had a program to give them a better grounding in Bible knowledge, a more thorough understanding of the faith that goes beyond just catechetical training. And some skills for practical leading of congregations and groups within the congregation.
So you had lay people who were leading worship services in the villages until they could get the education that they needed to be ordained. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, there were at the time I was there. Let me count on my fingers here. I think there were a total of 6 European missionaries, 2 Americans, and 3 or 4 Germans, and 4 ordained Tswana pastors. And there were about 40 congregations and a lot of places that were preaching stations that we were trying to develop into congregations. So it was pretty clear that a congregation was not going to be served by an ordained pastor every week. And for ongoing regular ministry, we were from the beginning completely dependent for effective ministry on service of lay leaders.
This sounds a lot like New Testament, where Paul would go into different areas and raise up the local leader. and then use the ancient distance education strategy called epistles to educate those, staying a little bit, going back maybe once or twice, or sending somebody else there once or twice in order to help those leaders grow. Is that the kind of strategy that you use too?
Well, I won't claim that we developed it from unique insight into the New Testament. It was it was just the necessary way to conduct ministry. If the if the ministry in Botswana had been limited to the congregations that an ordained pastor could serve every week, we would have had to close 2/3 of the congregations, um, and just say those other places don't get the gospel. Um,
Mhm.
that,
Well,
and you mentioned the Book of Acts. Every time I read the Book of Acts, it still shocks me what short periods of time Paul was in a town or city, um, and before moving on, either by his own choice or by events and circumstances. It's amazing how little time he spent there before the ministry was in the hands of local people.
well, now in America, we've seen a decline in Christianity, a decline in the number of pastors going to traditional seminaries, and we've seen incredible increases in the number of people coming from other countries, countries that were closed to Christian missionaries. And God, in His wisdom, has been bringing more than 500,000 immigrants a year to this country. And because of all of that, the Missouri Synod has declared that the United States is a world mission field. How does Mission Nation Publishing fit into that new context and that new understanding? Although I'm afraid that most LCMS congregations do not understand that they are mission bases. So maybe you say a few words about that.
Yeah, I think, thanks for that. Well, under your leadership, Bob, the Mission Nation Publishing was able to produce an important series of missionary biographies. And these are not like the old style missionary biographies that told of an American or a European in his pith helmet going off to deepest, darkest someplace. These are about missionaries to America. And those are tremendously important and exciting stories that the church in North America needs to hear. So those biographies are a tool to, I would say, change the imagination of American Christians about what the church looks like and what mission is. Because mission isn't from us to them, from the rich to the poor, from the powerful to the weak. Actually, in the New Testament, it goes the opposite direction quite often. It goes from the weakest to the most powerful. It goes from people who are under arrest and in prison to the most important leaders in the Roman Empire. So the direction is of mission in reality today is from everywhere to everywhere, and that means that we are always on a in a place from which God wants to send His mission into the world, but we're also on the receiving end of God's mission as He brings new Christian leaders to us. And the Mission Nation publications of missionary biographies has been part of that and can help the congregations in North America understand the world they live in.
Yeah, I think we believe that they would communicate to a congregation that the United States is a mission field, and that God, in His mercy, has been sending courageous, intelligent, effective, entrepreneurial people who have been refined by fire to as a gift to the church in America. I think
Absolutely.
you've seen that. I think you've seen that in some of the people that you're preparing at the seminary in EIIT students. Maybe can you tell us about one of those students that you know as an example of someone who has come here and is sharing Christ in powerful ways?
Yeah, I'm not going to use his name, but I'm going to talk about an EIIT student who was born and raised in Liberia. Um, and uh, by the time he came to America, uh, although he didn't have a college degree, he'd been through high school education. He had become a church leader. I think he was an elder in his congregation in Liberia before the Civil War drove him out of the country and into exile. While he was a refugee in neighboring Ivory Coast, he started a number of congregations. He didn't just continue worshiping as a Christian, he actually became an active missionary, starting new congregations while he himself was a refugee. And when he had the opportunity to resettle to the United States and get out of life in a refugee camp, which I think he was probably pretty happy about, he continued his work as a missionary in America, and he would round up groups of Africans. Of course, there was an immediate connection with people from his homeland in Liberia, but really any West Africans were happy to find a church home that was like their own, somehow like their homeland. And he started congregations in America, and then went to seminary. uh, we'd be happy if one of our seminary graduates went out and started one or two congregations. This guy had started probably more than a dozen congregations before he became our student,
Mhm.
and continued his work while he was in our Ethnic Immigrant Institute of Theology, the EIIT program at Concordia Seminary.
I know. I'm thinking of Gagan Garung in St. Louis, who's an evangelist. He hasn't gone through the program, but he's working under the supervision of past pastors in the area. And he, because of his evangelism work, more than 70, and I'm sure it's more than that now, probably more than 100, Nepalese immigrants have been baptized in LCMS churches. He shares Christ with them, brings them to the LCMS church. They're baptized and their families, and they grow. It's an incredible thing. Tell
That's
us.
incredible, and that's a great example of how a leader from a cultural and ethnic background can be an effective witness to people like himself, whereas those people that he's connecting with would never wander into an LCMS congregation and just decide to join. The obstacles of language and ethnicity and cultural background, even ethnic bias and religious prejudice, are just too high. But he can meet them at a much less intimidating and much more effective way.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we've written Goggins' biography. You can see this, "The Unexpected Missionary," and it talks about the trauma that he went through living 21 years in a refugee camp, and the persecution that he received when he became a Christian. So I'm sure there are many more stories like that as well. Tell us about Revelation 7:9, new initiative thanks to the Lutheran Women's Missionary League.
Well, Revelation 7:9 is a project that's born out of the church that God already sees, and that He's given us a glimpse of in the book of Revelation, chapter 7, verse 9. Look it up. There are a lot of people there who don't look like you and me. There are a lot of people there who don't talk like you and me. God's idea of the church, God's reality of the church already now, is a church that comes from every nation and language and tribe and race and people group. Uh,
I had the chance to preach at the St. Louis Seminary, and one of the things I did was look at the people who were there then, and this is years ago. It's changed now, but I said to them, "You don't look like heaven," because it was
that's,
all white English speaking people. And years later, one of the pastors who graduated came up to me and said, "I was there that day when you said that, and I got really angry with you. And now that I'm out and I see the opportunities among people of different ethnic groups, now I understand."
yeah, the Revelation 7-9 program is simply an effort to connect with congregations and work with them, coach their pastors and leaders, and give them resources to help them connect to people in their own communities who are different from them, who have a different race or ethnic group or language or national background, because they're there in every community in America. And congregations, even if they would like to connect with them, often don't know how. And that's what we're trying to do with the Revelation 7-9 program.
Now, the LWML gave us a large grant so that we've got $100,000 to develop those resources to inspire and equip those churches to reach some people different than their own. What's your vision for the future of Mission Nation publishing? What do you see as the next big step, and where we'd be in 10 years from now, maybe?
Well, Lord willing, we'll be in heaven in 10 years. I'm praying that the Lord will come back. But honestly, I think Mission Nation's role will continue to be providing those resources that can be put into the hands of congregations and faithful Christian leaders in local settings, to connect with communities around them that are different from themselves. I think that means continuing our work like the missionary biographies, to shape the imagination of existing congregations. We have a lot of wonderful white Anglo people in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, um, and God loves them. Uh, God is his heart is full for them, and he is looking forward to them being with him forever. Um, and yet, there are other people around them that God wants to save as well, and that means that He wants the word of the gospel, the promises of Jesus Christ, to connect with those people in the communities around them.
Yeah, I think
It's always about the people who aren't there yet, right? And a church that's involved in God's mission is a church that makes its decisions and its choices as if the people who aren't there matter.
and that's why we've seen this as a glass. It's probably more than half empty or half full, because 90% of Lutherans are white English speaking people, and yet today it's less than 60% of the United States are white English speaking people, and so that glass is waiting for those new people to be brought in. God's brought them to us as them also as a gift to share the gospel with.
I think that's exactly the right attitude and the right perspective to have on a changing demographic that we see in America. The and maybe this is where my mission experience in Botswana has become an asset. Before my family and I moved to Botswana, my grandmother, uh, who was a wonderful, sweet Christian woman from Mississippi, she said to me, "Well, William, I think it's wonderful that you're going to Africa, but tell me, aren't there a lot of black people there?" And and I had to admit that she was right. There are, in fact, a lot of black people in Botswana. And my family and I, we were definitely a minority. We
Mhm.
were
Mhm.
we stood out. Uh,
Mhm.
we could let our kids wander around the village, and it was not hard to find them because everybody knew exactly where they were. Um, the So we have the experience of being a minority, and we understand. I do understand the anxiety that people feel as the communities around them change. It's different. Uh, Things sound different. Things look different. Um, but I think your perspective of seeing these new people in our communities as a gift from God is exactly the right one.
It,
Um,
it, this is like, Jesus saying, fish on the other side of the boat. You know, we gathered in a bunch of wonderful white English speaking people, but there's another side that is just there waiting. But I think a lot of times congregations and pastors have wanted to do this, but they don't know how and they're not prepared. So they go out and they do it and they make a mistake and they never try again. They say, "Oh, it doesn't work. We tried it. It doesn't work." What can we do to get more Christians and more Christian churches involved in this ministry?
well, I think we work on their imaginations. I think we help them read and hear the stories
Mhm.
of of uh, of the way in which the gospel is changing lives in communities close to them, around them. I think we give them some resources that will help them connect with some of their neighbors that they haven't been able to connect with before. And I think that might mean uh, putting in their hands some resources in languages other than English. You know, up to now, Mission Nation has produced its resources in English for the existing congregations because our first job is shaping the mission imagination of the Christians in our congregations.
You know,
That means
one
community.
interesting opportunity that came along. Our church has a Hispanic deacon, and he's been in the Southeastern District Deacon Program, and they read Bob Kolb's book, The Christian Faith, and he came to me and said, "Pastor, this should be in Spanish. Every person should read this in Spanish." And I said, "Okay, it's going to cost some money to do that. If you raise the funds to do that, we'll do it." And we called Dr. Kolb, and he was for it. And Concordia Publishing House has given us permission to translate it into Spanish and use it. And he came to me last week and he said, "Pastor, I've got money for the book." They've been raising money for this, and they've got $1,000 towards it. So this is one opportunity that we'll be able to put this up on the Mission Nation website, and people can download it as a resource all over the world, all over the Spanish-speaking world, anyway.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example, and it illustrates why the resources that are produced with an eye to the context and situation of congregations in America will often have use outside of America as well.
Yeah.
Uh, we keep that in the back of our minds. It's not our primary focus. This is not an international mission sending organization. Uh, the but the resources that are used are have broader applicability because, like I said earlier, mission is from everywhere to everywhere.
Mhm. Any closing thoughts that you want to share? Thank you for all those ideas and sharing and the opportunity to talk about this, about Mission Nation.
Well, I guess in closing, I would just express the hope and prayer that uh, Christians in our congregations uh, start seeing their own neighborhoods, their own communities as mission fields, and their own congregation as missionary outposts, tools that God wants to use, bases from which the gospel promise will go out into their communities, and not think about mission as something far away that somebody else is responsible for. maybe to which they send a check once a year, but as something that they themselves can get involved with. And if they're looking for resources to help them get involved in God's mission at their local level, hope they think of Mission Nation.
Well, when Lynn and I began this ministry 6 years ago, we had no idea of what it would grow into, and how wonderful it has been for congregations to see themselves in different ways. And I'm thankful God has brought me to used me for a particular period of time and used me for that. And we're very thankful, Will, that he's brought you to this ministry now with the experiences and knowledge and intelligence and passion that you have to share Christ with all people. Thank you very much, my friend. It's great talking to you today.
And thank you, my friend. You've been a mentor and a resource to me, and I covet your prayers.
You will always have them, Will, at Mission Nation. Thank you.
Thank you.